Good morning, Ethan. Welcome to the Architectural Technology Podcast.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Really good. I saw your really good video about retentions, and I wondered whether we should talk about retentions, and then we'll link people to your YouTube channel so they can find out a bit more.
Okay, let's talk about it.
So first of all, what are retentions and what are they for?
Retention money is the contractors claim contractors keep the money originally. That was a long time ago. And it's just like a guaranteed if the subcontractors did a good job and then he pays it back. If subcontractors has some need to repair at the end of the project and then the main contractor use it to repair this project, probably is about 5% of retention money. When the
In New Zealand, we have a law that controls this. It's called the Construction Contracts Act 2002. And a little bit of history to the Act was that there was a very large construction company and it was withholding 10% from every subcontractor from
Mhm.
every payment they made. The challenge was that none of that money was put aside for those subcontractors. And when that large construction company went into liquidation, the subcontractors lost all of their retention monies. So the Labor government at the time introduced the Construction Contracts Act. So the Act of Parliament makes it law that the retention monies are held in trust for that subcontractor. And of course, not only that, but the principal of the contract can also withhold retention money from the contractor to enforce, as you said, to enforce the repair and the full completion of the contract at the end of the defects liability period.
Yeah, that's the purpose of retention money.
Yeah.
And importantly, you must keep the retention money in the trust. You shouldn't keep it's the laws requires you to keep in the trust. You shouldn't keep it in your own saving account.
No, that was the big problem. They kept it in their own account. In fact, they didn't even keep it. They just used it. They didn't put it into a savings account or anything. They just used it as part of their capital. And when they went into liquidation, all of those subcontractors who were owed millions of dollars, they had to line up as an unsecured creditor along with everybody else. And they lost most of their money.
Yeah, that's how is it for retention money.
If you look at the Construction Contracts Act, the purpose of it is to ensure cash flow in the industry. Cash flow is the lifeblood of the construction industry, and making sure that the contractors and the subcontractors get paid if things fail is a really important part of that act.
Yeah. And also retention is required to make sure that the main contractors need to report the subcontractors regularly, and subcontractors is right to see. That's quite unique about it nowadays. Previously,
I
it's
think,
not. Yeah,
I
it's
think that
very
is unique because I think in the past, the subcontractor really had to keep track of it themselves,
Mhm.
whereas now the onus is on the main contractor to keep track of the retentions they're holding for each subcontractor. That could be a lot of work. If you've got loads of subcontractors, keeping track of all of that money.
Yeah. So maybe the accounting firms or the quantity surveyor or the construction accountants need to do that.
I'm
Otherwise,
sure there's software that does all of this for them.
yeah, or AIs.
Yeah. So in New Zealand, we've got this. I think it's a fantastic law. And when I was teaching, one of the things we used to do is get our students to go into the industry and find out. One of the interesting things was that most of the people, when they were asked, the architects and the builders, they were asked if it affects them, and most of them said no, not at all. And
Why is it interesting?
I think because it works so well, because it keeps the money flowing,
Hmm.
that they no longer think of it as a challenge
Hmm.
because the subcontractors find it nice because the money flows. And if the money doesn't flow, then they've got penalties or they've got provisions in the act that allow them to seek a dispute and get the dispute resolved while they carry on working. Remember that before the Construction Contracts Act, we used to have pay if paid and pay when paid.
Hmm.
So the subcontractors would work and they wouldn't get paid until the main contractor said they had been paid. But the subby had no way of knowing whether the main contractor had received his money that month and
Yeah.
whether because that was private information.
Hmm.
Well, that's now been outlawed. So
Yeah.
if a subcontractor submits a claim
And the main contractors must pay within
That
the time frame according to
Yeah,
the
they've got to pay within that
contract.
time frame.
Yes.
They have no choice.
Yeah.
In the old days, the main contractors were using the subcontractors as a form of a bank, that
Yeah.
they would just withhold money so
Yeah.
that they could do the work. It was just poor economics, really, poor business practice. And
Uh,
that,
it's easy to become some old time. It's easy to be a main contractor.
yeah, keep
Yep.
hanging on to the money, pay. So, and I think that's why the architects always, if it was an architect on a commercial project, every month you had to do a payment schedule anyway.
Yeah.
And so it really hasn't changed the payment schedule. All it's done is to force the principal to pay on time.
Yeah.
And if they don't pay on time, there are penalties in the contract.
Yes.
So I think that didn't make extra work for the architects. But I think in the long run, what it meant is that it's easier for architects to administer those contracts because the subcontractors are getting their payment. And so everybody's much happier about the flow of money in that contract.
Mhm.
The main contractor is aware that they have to perform in certain ways. They know that the money is coming on a regular basis because they know that the Construction Contracts Act forces the money to come in. They've then got the money to pay the subcontractors, which they've already claimed for against the principal. So the money is flowing and the cash flow is flowing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's why they said that they don't notice the change. I think maybe the wording was, has it affected you? And the answer was no. Maybe
Mhm.
the question should have been, how has it changed the construction? And the answer would have been that there are no longer those money problems.
So that means the construction lawyers must be very disappointed.
But yes, they probably are. So that to me is a major change. So let's get back to retentions. So if we've got a main contractor, they withhold 10% to start with from the subcontractor, and it's a sliding scale. So as it becomes worth more, the percentage goes down, and that's covered in the Act as well. And so the contract has to specify that retentions will be used, or we've got the bond issue.
Yeah.
So there's a bond that we can call on. And the bond, as you said in your video, was like an insurance policy.
Yeah. Same thing. Same thing, but different.
So if the subcontract doesn't perform, then if I'm the principal and the main contractor doesn't fix something at the end of the retentions period or the end of the defects liability period, I can say, I'm calling on that bond. And remember that the retentions are only called upon when they fail to perform.
Mm.
So at the end of the defects liability period, if the main contractor hasn't fixed something, I had a house construction done recently and the contract didn't include any retentions, which was frustrating for me because I've always worked on contracts where we have retentions where we can always say to the main contractor, hey, I got your money. You want your money? You finish.
You have no authority. You have no power.
No, and it turned out that when they moved my heat pump system, they damaged it. And so it
Mhm.
lost all of its gas. And so when I went to switch on my heat pump, it didn't work. So I phoned up, and it was really the fact that the main contractor wanted to keep a good reputation that made him lean on the subcontractors to finish the job.
Oh, that's really good.
So that was
Nice.
good. Now, the one thing about the Construction Contracts Act is that it only applies to commercial projects. So one of the challenges I see with retentions is where, for example, there was a case not so long ago in Hawke's Bay where I live, where there was a franchise, I think it was. There was it was a franchise home builder, and they were building houses and they were keeping retentions from their subcontractors. But because they were considered to be domestic projects, the CCA retentions did not apply.
All right.
So when that company went into liquidation, none of the retentions were held in trust. Now, I think I've done some research, so let's have a look. I've got the contract up now. Now, under the Act, a commercial construction contract is defined as a contract where none of the parties is a residential occupier. A residential occupier is an individual who currently occupies or intend to occupy wholly or mainly as a dwelling unit. So if we have a look at that wording and
Mhm.
apply it to that home builder, But actually, that home builder, that franchise builder, wasn't intending to occupy the house.
No, never.
Therefore, the Construction Contracts Act 2002 should have been applied to the construction of that house, and the retentions should have been held in trust.
Yeah. So how they must have a overlook of that process, or they didn't think about
Yeah,
that. Probably.
maybe they've changed the wording, because it used to be, the wording I thought used to be, this doesn't apply to domestic construction, but it's now quite specific. A contract where none of the parties is a residential occupier. I mean, the thing I do love about Notebook LM is I uploaded the act. I got it to read it for me.
Yeah.
I can ask
And
it
then you start
questions,
asking the
and it
question.
tells me exactly where in the act this is. So what does it say here? This is the interpretation of the act. So it's now the interpretation of the act. Oh, section 19. Commercial construction contract means a contract for carrying out construction work in which none of the parties is a residential occupier of the premises that are subject to the construction contract. So if I'm building a domestic project for a friend of mine, I'm not an occupier.
No, you're not.
Therefore, it's a commercial contract,
Yes.
and therefore the act applies, including retentions.
So that means your house you should have held for a retention.
If I'm building it for a friend of mine, yes. So
And
if I'm building a house for you, if I'm organizing all the construction of your house, I could apply retentions under the CCA.
yeah, because you're doing commerce, trade.
Yeah.
Business.
Yeah. So where I'm getting my own house done, I am the occupier of that construction.
Yes.
Therefore, it doesn't have to apply.
Painful. You should have put it somebody name.
Yeah.
Smart.
As I said, I'm used to having retentions, and I found it awkward not having retentions.
Mm.
Because the purpose of retentions is to ensure that the work is carried out correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there were lots of cases where I worked in different contracts where it would get to the end, and so at practical completion,
Mhm.
where the building is practically complete and the client is ready to, or the principal is ready to take over the building, it's the job of the contract manager or the architect or whoever's administering the contract to check the building to make sure it's suitable for occupation. So are the carpets down? No. Well, I can't move in without the carpet. Are the doors and windows in? No. Well, I can't move in. So the definition of practical completion is that the building is practically complete for all intents and purposes.
Yes.
Carpets are down, the walls are painted, the doors and windows are in, the ceilings are in, the light works, the air conditioning works, all that stuff. It's a good idea to make sure that all of those things are working before practical completion certificate is issued. At the issue of the practical completion certificate, 50% of the retentions are normally paid back.
Yeah.
Because the building is practically complete. So you're holding on to a small bit of money.
Small percentage, yes.
But
because in defect liability period.
Yeah. So the idea is then that during the defects liability period, you might notice, they didn't finish painting one of the old tricks, don't paint the top of the door because no one can see it. Don't finish under the toe kicks for the kitchen. And someone said to me, what, are you going to get down on your hands and knees and look under there, are you? And I said, no, I've got a mirror. I'm going to shine a mirror under there and have a look. He thought I was just a little bit obsessive. But it was all that kind of stuff where you check to make sure everything's working. One of the classics was that you try the heat pump and it heats, but it's not summer, so you don't have to try the cooling cycle.
Quite interesting.
And then summer comes around, you try the cooling cycle and it doesn't work. Well, you need the retentions to force them to come back to do that work.
Yeah, but when you look at it, pre-1010, the retention period is quite short by default, but you can extend it.
So we used to always extend heating and ventilating systems for a full year.
Yeah.
Because you want to make sure they go through an entire cycle, all different types of the year. So the idea is that when everything is fine, then you can pay back the retentions. But I have been in the situation where the contractor, you kept calling the contractor, come back and fix this thing, come back and fix this. This is loose. It's a safety issue. It's loose. You got to fix the handrail. Oh, yeah, I'll get there. Never gets there. Under the retentions, you can employ a third party to come and finish that off, and you can charge the retentions amount for that sum.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you get someone in, it costs you $1,000 to have that thing fixed. You can then go to the retentions and say, I'm paying it out of this because they didn't do their work.
That's how is it?
From an economics point of view, Ethan, the fastest way for the contractor to earn high profit margins is to finish the retentions. Because you're withholding quite a lot of money from them, and you're going to keep all of that money from them until they fix that tiny thing. That tiny thing might only take an hour of their time to
Yeah,
finish,
true.
and yet they'll get all of their retention back for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to say to people, it's their quickest way for them to earn high margins is to finish their work.
Oh, shall we wrap it?
I think we should wrap it up. But Ethan, what I would say is that your video was really good about spelling out what the penalties are and how those things work. And we'll better put the link in the description. And my understanding before I watched your video was that the Construction Contracts Act and the protection of the retentions only applied to commercial projects and not residential projects.
Mhm.
But I now see that any project where it's not an owner-occupier getting the work done is a commercial project.
Mhm.
So it should apply to all domestic construction where you're not the final occupier.
All right. Hopefully all the listeners knows that and we benefit from it. And yes, don't forget to like and subscribe our channels on Spotify, and see you next week.
I'd love to hear some comments about how other countries work. In England, of course, it's the JCT contract, how that works, and the range of those. If you'd like to leave a comment, let us know what you thought of this episode.
All right. Bye.
See you later, Ethan.